Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of What We Can't Not Talk About, the podcast of the Austin Institute for the Study of Family and Culture. I'm Dr. Mariana Orlandi, director of the Institute and host of this little show. For those who follow us, some religiously follow us, we recently talked about love, and we do regularly talk about marriage. But here's the question. What is marriage? Also, why should love and marriage go together? Can't people just happily cohabitate? Or, if love is an action, as our Aquinas scholars teach us, why a person and not another one? Do feelings matter or they don't matter at all? And if we stick with the feelings foundation, or if feelings matter, why shouldn't partners call things off and move on once their feelings change? Why even formalizing their union at any point? And why do we need to think of marriage as a permanent, let alone heterosexual union? Isn't that just a Christian concept? Well, maybe. Maybe not. Maybe there is a rationality behind all of this. This spring, I had the pleasure to host a seminar on these questions. What is marriage and what's good about it? And it's definitely the kind of seminar that we're going to host again. But as usual, we want to use our seminars and our conversations on this little podcast too to think together. And we do it very often by inviting scholars who are clear thinkers, and I would say in most cases also great teachers. So an amazing scholar is with us today, and I can say a very good teacher too, and is here to address this topic and to help us think about marriage and about the family as institutions, as realities that precede us. So basically the opposite of social constructs, to use a modern term. So with me today is Dr. Owen Anderson, professor of philosophy and religious studies at Arizona State University, where he taught for 25 years. Good morning, Dr. Anderson, and welcome on our show.
I'm really glad to be here again and talk with you. It's always fun.
Thank you. Yeah, I will, if you allow me, and if our audience allows us, I'm going to call you Owen.
Yeah, please do.
It's okay. And thank you also for, thank you for coming to the Institute, visit us a few weeks ago when you delivered an excellent talk on the rationality of belief. And that talk is what suggests, what makes me believe that we can talk about the rationality of marriage and the rationality of the family too. Now, so
great questions. The things you just laid out, those are great questions. So.
Okay, so let me start with that. Like, do you think we can do the same? Do you think that we can rationally defend marriage and the family? Is that a possible journey?
Oh, yeah. I think that's a really important thing to address right now in culture, because the debates about marriage tend to think that if you're giving a religious answer, you're giving the Bible's answer only. Like you're going to a Bible verse to give the answer. And although I'm okay with that in one sense, as a philosopher, I want to also affirm that we can, as you said, know from reason these things as well. And in a philosophy class, that's really what we're exploring and looking at. So answering these questions rationally is a great approach. And I think the more that people understand that can be done, the better.
And I think we tried to do this during the seminar, and that's when I realized that most of our students heard during that seminar for the first time the difference between the conjugal view of marriage and the revisionist or the reform view of marriage. So, would you, as an expert, as a philosopher, as a great teacher, as I say, would you help me explain what do we mean by this kind of marriage that we think it's possible to rationally defend?
Well, yeah, you brought up Aquinas, and in my mind, that triggers something very important, which is the subject I use when I talk about this in classes for the first time, and that's friendship. So before I even get into marriage, I ask, what is it to have a friend? And so that actually puts me back to Aristotle. And so we go over this question, Because in one sense, you might say that marriage and friendship are different. But that's precisely the question to ask, right? Should you be friends with the person you marry? And so I put it to my students this way: how many friends do you have? And of course, everybody, like if you think about friends as like Facebook friends, maybe you have a couple thousand. If you say no, people you can chat with and share your ideas with, that's maybe more than the intimate ones, but not a couple thousand. Maybe that's down to like 20 or 30. And they say, well, what about people that really get you? And they might say maybe, a high number is 5, maybe less than that. And then I say, well, what about this? What if friendship is mutual love? You're helping each other. It's not charity. Charity is when I love the other person, but they don't love me back for whatever reason. Maybe they're like, if I help the poor, they can't necessarily help me back. So that's charity. But in friendship, you're loving each other, which means you want what is good for each other. And so far, everyone's on board. They say, yeah, that makes sense. When you love someone, you want what's good for them, not what's bad for them. And so then I put the question this way: how many of your friends know what is good? And then I ask them a little more personal: do you know what is good? And sometimes they might throw out a few things like, well, to be happy. And so we look at that. Well, you're happy because of something. That thing is the good. So what is it that will make you happy then? You have, just by saying happiness, you haven't answered the question. And so they throw out a few things like that. Health. Well, you're healthy to do things, though. You're not healthy just to be healthy. You want to be vigorous and able to do lots of activities. And so eventually it comes down to they'll say, yeah, I don't really know what is good. And my friends don't know what is good. And so then I say, well, then do you really have any friends? And it kind of dawns on them, in the Aristotelian sense, they don't have any friends. And the reason why that's important is it's a function of they haven't been pursuing what is good this far in their life. So then when we get to more complicated questions, or at least call it higher level questions like what is marriage, I'll ask them, are you really in a position to think about loving a spouse? And you've already admitted you can't even have friends. And that kind of formulates the problem in their mind.
And it's a perfect segue, to the title of the seminar is like, what is good about it, right? So what is good? Yeah. What is the good of marriage? But let me follow your train of thoughts. Also, it's very amazing that you started with friendship, because we finished our previous podcast talking about the friendship between the Maritain couple. We were talking about love, but we were talking about Raisa Maritain and Jacques Maritain and the friendship in the book about friendship that she wrote as a biography. Following your train of thoughts, like, okay, so then what is the good of friendship and what is the good of marriage, right? So if that's how we can start to explain it.
Yeah, I think so, because of course marriage is different than friendship, but I haven't met anyone yet, whether it's revisionist or conjugal or some third view of marriage, who says marriage isn't friendship. Everyone will say it's like a Venn diagram where friendship's part of it, but there might be more to it in marriage than just friendship. However, I don't know. There are some people who would say that's not true. I mean, basically they would say marriage is not a real thing and you just do whatever you want with your friends. But assuming that everyone agrees friendship is part of marriage, then yeah, we're asking, what does that mean to love another person? And have you demonstrated any track record of loving anybody? So, for example, I use analogies like if you came for a job interview, they usually want to see what's your track record been and what were your previous jobs like. And in this case, it's not previous relationships per se. It could be a number of examples, like have you been able to love your siblings? That's pretty hard for a lot of people, right? But when you become 18, you start getting into relationships that maybe turn into marriage. Do you have any proof you've ever loved anybody before? Or has your life mostly been self-centered? And if you have no proof you've loved anybody before, then when you want to get into marriage, which is can be very complicated and have lots of difficulties, what gives you the confidence you'll get through those when you've never been trained to love anyone except for maybe you love yourself?
Sorry, I'm speechless. Yeah. Okay. So we go from there and look at the track records. Everyone can make an examination of conscience right now and say, okay, if someone was to meet me, what would they think of me? Am I capable of loving? Without too much, sense of like feeling guilty for not.
Yeah. I don't mean by this, I just mean loving, like I said, your sibling. That's all I'm talking about. Not track record of any other kind. Just Are you able to say, yeah, my sister, my brother, they annoy me, but at the end of the day, I love them. I do what's best for them. I sacrifice my own time for them.
And I think we can tell even by, the dedication of people to their work, to their friend. You mentioned your friends, right? But like, are you there for the person regardless of what the person is doing for you in that moment? Because I think that then the question about marriage becomes, to me, to a lot of, the young lovers that are planning on marriage, is like, are you ready to be next to this person if something bad happens? Yeah. Right? Like, you're not with that person because we're having fun.
Yeah, that's the thing.
And that's why, you can't call things off when the fun is over. Because, my take has always been, I wish my husband was someone that would stay with me if I ended up on a wheelchair or, right? Or if you're bedridden. Like, that's, and am I capable or willing to do the same? Now, is this an obsolete view of marriage, or is this rooted in our nature?
That's a great question, because what you just said had about 4 or 5 profound topics in it.
Okay.
So, for example, will someone keep loving me when it's not fun? And what you describe is how people think about relationships. I have a lot of fun with you. You have a great sense of humor, but what about when that is over? What if I'm not funny anymore because I'm going through a sickness, and that's not very fun for you to be around? We would want to know that love persists. And I think that idea of love persisting, I've never met somebody across, 3 generations of student age groups I've taught that has not thought that's good. Like, if I ask them, which is a better kind of love? One that says, we had fun 5 years ago, but you're not fun anymore, I'm out of here. Or one that says, I'm committed to us and to loving you no matter what we go through. No one's ever said the first one is preferable. Everyone wants the second one. But what I find is, among the student age groups I'm talking to now, maybe it was starting with millennials, maybe Xers, I'm not blaming anybody, but love and sex are almost confused with each other. So that if you have a friend, it doesn't matter what their gender is. If you're close to them, you feel you love them, then sex is on the horizon. It's a thing you could do. Mm-hmm. Rather than the other approach, which is getting us closer to our discussion of marriage, that's not on the horizon pretty much for 99.999% of the relationships you have. There's a thing called friendship, which is the highest kind of love between people who aren't married. And even within marriage, it's very important. So that love and sex are understood to be very different sorts of things. They always go together in one sense, but you have lots of people you love. Well, that'll never be an aspect of the relationship.
To bring it back to the kind of love that they desire and that they want. So you just said, right? So they would all prefer the kind of love that the person stays next to you, right? There's an intuition that is the kind of marriage that we want. How is this related to this conversation about sex? I think I got lost.
Then I find that people think if I'm having fun with someone else, then the way our relationships get closer is with sex. And I'm saying that actually destroys most relationships. And that gets into questions then about, for example, gender. Currently in our culture, for many people, gender doesn't matter in that equation either. If I'm having fun with you, who cares about what your gender is? We can go on to the next level. Whereas we need to think about what the nature and purpose of sex is and how it relates to love. And I think then you'll see that the kind of love that friendship has is almost always destroyed by thinking that way. Most relationships are never the kind that would involve sex, and they don't need to be. That doesn't make them better. It would actually destroy them.
Why'd you say that? Why would it destroy them?
When you confuse friendship and the intimacy that comes from sex, both of them are ruined. And it is interesting that in most languages, I don't know all languages. I know of a few of them. I'm not proficient in a lot of them, but the really bad word is the word for desecrating sex. So if you really want to say a bad thing to somebody, I'm not going to say it, but you say, you're a mother person who desecrates sex. And I said, whoa, that's a bad word, right? That's really bad. Because we recognize, at least intuitively, that desecrating this most intimate and close relationship is the worst thing you can do because it's personal. It's a personal relationship. It's not just like a business relationship, but we have bad words for that if you harm a business partner. But it's not as bad as this relationship, which you should have understood is so personal that you shouldn't break it that way.
Which I think it becomes obvious when you have anyone think of why rape remains one of the worst and most intolerable crimes, right? Like there is like an immediate rejection of any sort of forgiveness of understanding of anyone who raped anyone. It's like that would be like, why is that different?
Example,
why is that different from like stealing something from you, right? There's something extremely personal that okay, then why are we in this mess? Because I think I can think of some causes, more than I'm fascinated by the. I saw some of the things you published during Fidelity Month, which is something that happens in June. About
I got my flag on my door.
Oh, nice!
My office door, yeah.
If you could point to some of the causes of like this desperate confusion that we have today, where people not only cannot just, understand the difference between friendship and marriage, but also have no reason to believe that cohabitation isn't just the same thing, and that 3-4 people, polyamory is always been discussed. What are the causes of this current? I would call it confusion, but even just like curiosity, doubt, lack of stable references.
Yeah, I think the first thing I notice is it's not new. Sometimes, it might be new to us. Let's say as a Generation X, I say, wow, these are new developments we didn't do when we were kids. However, reverting to things like polyamory has been throughout the world. I mean, this is really common. I'll call it just the pagan view of sex and love. You read about it in Plato's Symposium. So it's not as if this is something all of a sudden people discovered some new way of doing things. So I would view it as reverting, I said, right? Going back from a good high ideal to an easier, less high ideal, if I put it that way. So we had a seminar at ASU last fall about the benefits of polyamory. And we don't have any seminars at ASU about the benefits of conjugal marriage. So that's just kind of in the mixture right now as people think, yeah, why not? If love is good, why not love as many people as you can? And see already that built-in confusion of love and sex. So I think that's one thing, is it's not new. But then the second thing is confusion and lack of, you did you use the word guideposts? Like lack of supports where you understand certain fundamental things about reality. And those are gone. So I call that an age of skepticism. We live in an age where people are questioning everything. I mean, I have students who question if the earth is a sphere, if we went to the moon, who killed JFK. They're questioning every narrative they get, partly because they saw the COVID stuff go down and they realize, I don't believe anybody anymore. But that includes, I don't know if God exists. I don't know what I am as a person. I don't know what sex is for. And so there's nothing that they have in their life that is a foundation, a philosophical foundation for understanding marriage besides just what do I want right now.
I love this answer that you just gave because I want to talk more about this age of skepticism, but also because in this podcast and in the programs we do, we often talk about, the crisis of marriage coming from A, the introduction of the bill, and B, divorce, right? So the one that separated the body from the reproduction from the act, right? The conjugal act from its consequences. And the other one being the divorce being the signal that feelings and the change of feelings should null a vow you made, right? So the value of your word. What I like about your answer and where I would like to continue going right now is that your take is a philosophical one. It doesn't matter, we can't even discuss a lot of the bill and discuss a lot of divorce, but is it even worth it to have a conversation if the person listening to me doubts that there is a difference between opinion and knowledge?
Right, exactly. Yep, that's another good one.
So
Yeah.
how did we get there then?
Yeah, I guess that's exactly what you have to do first. If you don't even have that in place, it was all just a matter of opinion, then you're just, wasting your time in the sense of all you'll be doing, you'll share your opinion, they'll share theirs. And I guess that could be fun, but you're not going to actually come to know things together. But I use the analogy, it's like a skyscraper, and you want to argue about stuff that's on like the 10th or 11th story, but the foundation isn't there. It's like the 10th and 11th story is just hovering in air. Well, no, it's supported by everything before it. So marriage is very important, but it's up here. It's like a 10th story issue that assumes all these other things are true. But people want to debate this one. Same with gender. They want to debate this one. But what about all these philosophical assumptions that you have back here? Or none. You might just be a skeptic, and it just whatever you think is how you feel at the moment. And so as a philosopher, I encourage my students or others to go back. What are the foundational assumptions you have going into it? So one of the best ones I found is what I brought up at the beginning. What is love and what is good for us? But even that is kind of like a third level thing, which brings us back to the next couple below it, because we're talking about persons. What is it to love a person, not love a pet or love a car? So now we get into philosophical issues about what is it to be a human. And then I think from there we get into the question of why is male and female a union and other things aren't a union? But even then, I think we still got to go back further to where do we come from? Because if at the end of the day, we're just the result of blind chance and time, then it doesn't matter what evolution made us mammals so that mammals only have babies by being male and female. Evolution is not normative, though. It doesn't know us. We're just an accident of evolution. And so that doesn't tell us how we should live, even if we agree on the fact that mammals only have offspring between a male and a female. And so we still have to go back further and say, where did we come from?
I am in love with what you said, because this is the best, advertisement. I think I should just cut this clip to describe what we do at the Institute. Many times, we're told, it's like, well, you're about family and culture. You should talk more about family life, parenting, marriage. And we do.
Yeah.
But how can we and that's exactly what you just said, how can people get marriage right when we don't get the person right? Yeah. When we are forgetting where we come from, and we think that, if we are the result of a sperm donation, or if we grew up with our own biological parents, there's basically no difference. And if we do not think, which is the other big question, if we don't think of where we're going, like the fact that we are aging and that we will die, which is, a terrible thing to say, especially in a podcast. They're not going to listen to us anymore, right? Like, oh, you just killed the fun. Well, but that's true. We're not creatures of Instagram. Like, we're not meant to look the same forever. And so what is the human purpose? And
that's the other. So where we come, that's right, 100%. Like, what am I? Where did I come from? And where am I going?
Do you think we could guide our audience through what would be the questions? Like you said, 10 story, starting from where I come from. If we want to get to understand what is called the conservative or the conjugal view of marriage, right? So for people that are confused about it, people that think, cohabitation is okay, you should try things out before you see that they work. You could have different spouses and there's no big... What is it that they should ask themselves or look answers for if they want to understand why the tradition defends a particular view of marriage?
Yeah, well, I think there's some natural things. Like we said at the beginning, from reason. So I don't think you have to go to Genesis chapter 1 and 2. I don't think you shouldn't do that. I'm opposed to trying to force people to not do that. I think that's also kind of like assuming atheism, and we don't have to assume atheism. But on the other hand, there is the case of what are things like. By natural things, I mean not necessarily like the way that evolution did it. I mean, what kind of thing is it? So, for example, there are male and female. That's a kind of thing. And both of those are humans. Humans are a kind of thing. They're different from other creatures. And so I think everyone will recognize in this debate, if they're conjugal or revisionist or some third view of marriage, that the male and the female union is different than other unions. It's not merely enjoyment or pleasure based. There is at least the potential, even on the pill, even for someone who's been told they're infertile, there's the potential for a child because it's the kind of relationship that brings about children. And so then we have to deal with, okay, what do we do about that? Is that normative at all? Does that matter at all? And that again brings us to that lower level question. Well, if we're just a product of chance, then I guess it doesn't, right? Who cares what evolution made? But if these things were made that way on purpose, and if human life has value so that it's good to bring more people into the world, then we realize, okay, this union between male and female is a special thing that exists in a different category than other friendships. And so we can't merely say it's friendship. And therefore, that kind of takes a lot of the things you asked about off the table, because it isn't a matter of, hey, I found someone fun to talk with, let's cohabitate for a while. Well, no, that's not the same thing as this relationship of a male and a female. So then that will raise some questions you brought up at the very beginning. Well, why does it have to be lasting or monogamous? Why not a polyamorous? And I think the nature of the relationship itself is, I'm not a biology professor, so I don't get into graphic details about this, but the union is only between two people per time in terms of the reproductive organs. And so polyamory is never a union. The union of a male and female is always a mutual thing at that moment. And so the really question isn't polyamory, because polyamory is not a union. The real question is, well, why should that be lasting past a moment? And so that brings us back to love. Who would say they don't want love to be lasting? Well, no one I've met. So in other words, what you're really asking then is, why should my physical expression, and it's the most intimate physical expression anyone can have, why should that be a lasting expression of love? And I've never met anyone who doesn't get the point then. In other words, of course it should be. Like you stop loving this person after 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a day, 10 days. No, the highest physical expression goes with the highest spiritual expression of love. And by spiritual, I don't necessarily mean religious, but just two people saying, I love you. You can't separate those. And that goes back to my example about cuss words. The worst cuss word in most of the languages I know is the person who separates sex and love, desecrates sex. People see that's reprehensible. And yet, if you don't think love is lasting, you're doing the same thing.
Yeah, I like how someone I know has been my mentor, says you can lie with your body, right? So you can lie with words and you can lie with your body. You can have a physical union with someone that you're not united with in other ways.
But it's also humanizing to think about, because we a lot of times think about it in terms of maybe the guy to the girl. The guy just wants this, and so he promises her, I love you. I'm not saying it's always that way, but just for the sake of argument, he promises I love you, and then he doesn't afterwards. He leaves. He got what he wanted. And we think that is desecration to her, no doubt about it. He lied. But it's also dehumanizing to himself, because he treated himself as if he is just a body and not also a soul. And he treated himself as if moments of pleasure justify lying, lack of integrity. And so there's really inherent and awful consequences for him in what all this says about him, because we're always a body-soul unity. We can't separate those and say, hey, for the next hour, I'm just going to be a body and do whatever bodies do. No, you're always also a soul, and souls are lasting. And if you are committed to loving this person, you're loving someone who's lasting. That's why it's important. I make this joke with my students. If you're going to get an engagement ring, you get a diamond, because they say diamonds are forever, because our souls are forever. It's like a symbol of saying, I'll love you forever. It's not going to end when you get old or we get sick. It'll be permanent, because our bodies and our souls don't end when our body does. And so again, that's a philosophical point, though. You might say, well, wait, not everyone agrees about that. Yeah, but that's why I said all that building structure. If someone does come into this debate and say, I don't think we have a soul, we're just a body, well, then the whole debate's a lot different.
Absolutely. But I would ask them, if anyone is thinking this and listening, I would just say, be coherent then. If you think that, then don't tell me that you're doing yoga because you need your soul to, feel that you are in your body. Like, there is a way in which the what could be required of anyone who thinks that fun is enough, no, I'm okay with someone leaving me the day I'm not fun anymore, is then to be coherent, right? So don't get mad at that father or mother that left you and when you needed them, because right, so because that if you do not ask things from yourself, right, if you don't hold yourself to a particular standard, then you should not hold anyone else to any particular standard, right? And so but in that, and that leads me to the anxiety. So what I really liked, it was a lecture you gave, maybe more than once, I don't know, but you talked about skepticism and philosophy, but then you call it the age of anxiety, right? You connect the two. And a lot of psychologists have been writing about the anxious generation, right? And we associate this anxiety we have with how busy we are and with Instagram and with the demands of the current. What I really like was this philosophical take. So as we did with marriage, understanding that the confusion might come from we are not thinking clearly. Can you just introduce us to this idea that anxiety comes basically from the same place?
Yeah, it really does. And that's great. And the book, The Age of Anxiety, there was some literary work. I think Graham Greene might have written a book with that title, but the psychologist Rollo May in the 50s, he was their Jordan Peterson. So, or the other way around. Jordan Peterson is our Rollo May. He wrote a lot of kind of these popular psychology books, and one of them was about the age of anxiety. So that's the early baby boomers, like young kid baby boomers. But then you're right. People say, well, that's what we're currently living under. But I think it relates to what we just said about the age of skepticism and the lack of the foundation of that building, because it's as if anxiety exists because you realize you're on the 10th floor of a building with nothing below you. And that'd be really anxious. You go, well, it's going to fall over. And so you have this feeling that your life is not on anything. And it creates anxiety. And so then we get, you mentioned yoga, we get some like new age solutions. ASU, it won't teach any religions, but it will teach yoga and Buddhist mindfulness, which I think is religious still. It won't have any like Christian alternative. Here's how you can deal with anxiety from a Christian perspective, but here's how you can do it only from Eastern religions. And their idea there is just you kind of stop thinking. You don't think about your anxiety. And that's what we mean when we say go meditate. We mean Eastern meditation. Just you kind of stop thinking, because really the Eastern philosophy would be something like this. You don't really even exist. This is all an illusion. But when we see in the Psalms, when the psalmist says meditate, he doesn't mean that. He means I meditate on God day and night, because God is that unchanging foundation my life is built on. And so my life up here, the 10th story, is not just floating in the air. It's supported on that rock that doesn't move. And so I can give any anxiety I feel either goes away once I realize that, or I can give it to God and pray and say, God, I'm really anxious about this. Help me. And I think that gets to a very deep need we have for that connection. Augustine said we have eternity in our hearts. And I think that we can show this rationally, not just by the Bible. Augustine did that we need to be connected to what's eternal, which means without beginning, had no beginning, it has no end, is permanent. And when we don't have that connection, we tend to be anxious, and we tend to live just out of our bodily needs. And that gets us to where you and I are right now in this conversation about relationships. We get to a point where we can say, we both agree we'll hang out as long as it's fun for ourselves, and then we'll move on if we need to, because it's the only thing I'm thinking about is myself. There's nothing eternal. And so I think all of these questions lead back to that desire. I want to connect to the eternal. And that also is really important for the topic of love, because the best human will let you down. And so the best human who's really good, they're very, devoted and whatnot, they're still limited, even if they just let you down by the fact that they're limited. Maybe you've got an important medical thing and they've got a job interview. They can't do both. And so they didn't do anything mean to you, but it's just they can't be there that day. But we want someone to love us who doesn't have those limitations, someone who will love us and they're always there for us. And that means that we want the love of God. And that's the kind of love we're really looking for. And then now we can translate to the discussion of marriage. That's the love that marriage imitates. And so when you separate marriage from God and his love, you're going to get into all kinds of problems. But if you bring it back to marriage, and for example, in the Bible, is God's relationship to his people, whether in the Old Testament or the New Testament, is marriage is used as a symbol of that. God calls Israel his spouse in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, we have Christ and the church as the bride of Christ. And so when we disconnect our marriage from that imagery of God's perfect love, it's going to run into all kinds of difficulties.
And if I may, I want to remain on this, but I would also say that we could talk of a more, the God of the philosophers in a way, saying, I'm not equating this to Eastern philosophy, but I'm equating it to like, okay, you're in doubt of like, who exactly is God, right? Is it the God of the Bible? But can't we use a realism in philosophy, right? Saying, okay, you do not know who God is, but can you accept that you are created, that you do not know where you come from, that you are going like understanding that your life is not an illusion? Because to me, like what this age of skepticism is not only the denial of God, but is we deny God because we first of all deny reality. Mm-hmm. So what would be the books? What would you suggest to, young people listening to us that are in this moment where they're like, is there even a reality around me? Am I just a product of my culture, my conditioning, my ethnicity, my identity, or is there something to be discovered?
Right. Yeah, that is exactly where philosophy sort of begins, with that curiosity of asking, can I do those things? And if the answer from the beginning is no, well, then all curiosity ends and you're done. And that's really sad. Instead of saying, no, you can know things. One common problem I find is that I'll get students who will then the next thing they say is, oh, so you think you can know everything? And so I had to clarify, no, that God is incomprehensible in one sense and not another sense. We can know some things about God, which are true things and they're real things, but we'll never know everything about God. In that sense, God is incomprehensible. You'll never sit down and say, you'll write your last sentence and that's all there is to know about God. And so there's always more, but that's an important part for relationships, isn't it? That's one dimension of relationships is you're always getting to know the other person. As soon as you get to a point in a relationship where it's like nothing new, repetitive, then something's wrong. And so even for the human level, we really can't ever finally know anybody, let alone God. But so there's some things we can know about God, like he has existed from eternity. He created us. He's personal. And that's where it goes from the God of the philosophers to something more, because there really isn't anything to love about Aristotle's God. Aristotle's God is not even aware of us, didn't create us, doesn't have a plan for us or any purpose for us, is not personal. Mm-hmm. And so that doesn't really do much for you if you say love that being. But when we think about God as a creator who's personal, not just a being that doesn't know us, but who knows us, who knew us before we were born, then it becomes much more personal. And now is where this might sound a little bit religious, but I think it naturally flows from that point. Okay, if God is eternal, he loved me. If I'm honest, I didn't love God. And what do I deserve for that? God who's perfectly lovable. There's nothing better than God, nothing more beautiful than God, more holy than God. But the truth is, I didn't care, not interested, got my own stuff I'm doing.
Got my relationships. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big problem. Yeah. So I think that naturally takes us to, well, people will say, well, the next answer is Christian. Well, it is. What if God also became incarnate? And now you have him to relate to in history as a person, both God and human, not only human, but human also, not only God. So everyone knows talking about Jesus. And he demonstrates God's love for you. Even when you were a sinner, he died for you. And that's the highest expression of love, that a man would lay down his life for his friends. So keeping on this theme of love now, we see that we really we have this deep desire. It's not satisfied by human relationships. It's not satisfied by Aristotle's deity. And it's satisfied by God who made us and knows us, but also God who saved us.
Can I say what this makes me think, though, is that true, we cannot receive it, we cannot replicate it, because, as you say, human beings will let you down. At the same time, the same act that generated us in the first place, so the miracle of life, right? Because we cannot make life. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That same miraculous act is the one and only thing that exclusively a man and a woman can do together. Right. So I think that there is something about, and you mentioned the covenant between God and his people, but there's something, even for those who struggle with believing in a God, like calling him, because I understand what you're saying and I totally relate, but I know that there is a gift at some point that comes into understanding with the heart these things, but that they can see that the moment a couple has a baby, that they have just participated in an action that somehow calls for that same love that is without limits, right? A father would die for his kid. I'm told, Disney movies show us that, right? Like the Lion King, or like you expect basically the father to die for the little child.
It'd be really strange if the dad didn't do that, or even if the dad paused to think about it, right? That'd be weird. Like, why'd you have to think about that? Why don't you just save your child? So I think you're right, and most people, I think, will report that in the sense of saying, having children changed my life. They'll say. I've never met someone who says the opposite. They might complain, it was really hard. My life changed in a lot of good ways, but there's also some difficult ways. But no one ever says something like, bringing another person into existence is like the fourth thing down. Winning the baseball game, that was number one. And then way down here is bringing, no one says that. They say, yeah, I would, when I saw this baby and I held this baby, I said, I'll do anything for this person.
Yeah. And if they said that, we would think they're psychopaths. So there's something, right? So there's something about a shared humanity that we have and some shared values and principles that make us say, well, if we met someone and that's interesting though, how Disney has played around marriage, and have the step families and the different genders, but they haven't had, a father not sacrificing for his son. There is.
You might add in the mom does it. The mom also becomes an action hero, but they never have it where the dad does. Because we would say, what's going on? What's wrong with that? And I think that is interesting. That goes back to one of our earlier points, that you can't get away from the conjugal view. You could say there's also other kinds of relationships, but like I said, in Plato's Symposium, that's what they're talking about, other kinds of relationships. But every person in that debate came from the union of a male and female. And Saturday Night Live had a skit 2 weeks ago that people thought was a change for them, because they haven't had any skit that has slightly conservative humor in decades. But it was based on a truth that is, you cannot get around. Yeah. It's natural to ask every person, who was your mom and who was your dad?
I'm going to link. Yeah. I'm going to share the link with our podcast descriptions of that Saturday Night Live. I was very impressed.
We're going to have a bunch of lawsuits, I think, down the road as these children become young adults. Because everyone who's an orphan naturally asks, who were my parents? We have movies about that also. Who was my mom? Who was my dad? And they ask this question, why did they give me up? And they hope it was something serious, right? Not just, well, I have a career and you were going to get in the way. They want to know, I loved you so much and it was just better for you to be in this situation because of this other thing. Every orphan wonders that. And these children are going to realize, they're going to go to fourth grade biology class and they're going to learn about mammals. And they're going to say, wait a minute. Dad, who's my mom? And are one of you my dad or is someone else my dad? Every one of those kids is going to have that question to these either two dads or two moms or 5 dads and 10 moms, whatever they do in their organization. And you can't get away from it. That's why I said the conjugal view is inescapable. We're produced only by that event. And then every orphan also asks the follow-up question, why didn't you stay together, mom and dad? Like, what happened? And they want it to be some good thing. Like maybe not that it's good if a parent dies, but it wasn't a moral thing. If they learn, well, dad was just coming through town, right, on a business trip and he never looked back and never thought about me, that hurts. Like you didn't think about your child. And so if the answer is, well, I wanted $60,000, so I rented out my womb. But did you think about me ever after that? Because I'm a person who kept existing. Did you wonder about me at all? Every one of those kids is going to grow up and have those. And those are going to be painful questions for them existentially and very difficult questions for those people that did that to them.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I can already hear someone who went through that and maybe was, the product of a surrogacy agreement. And then you are maybe 10, 15-year-old. You understand this and you understand your mother. You forgive her. and you say, you know, I understand she was in a difficult position. And this is what I think therapists would call a parentified child, right? So a child that thinks like an adult and is being charitable towards his parents in a way that he should have received instead of giving. So, and I know these are very difficult conversations. We've had these conversations with daughters of two moms that love both moms, but say, I'm still looking for my dad, right? So
yeah, it could be. You could say, thank you both for raising me. I know you put a lot of money and time into me, but I know there's more to my existence. You two men or you two women don't account for me existing. And that's why it presses back to the questions of where did I come from?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't even know. Owen, help me do this. How do we finish this conversation about marriage and the family? Because, we could go on forever. We could take many different directions. We could invite, and I'm thinking it's like, what can we invite people to read? What should they be thinking of? But what is your suggestion? You are the 25-year professor with great reviews. I've heard you teach. How do we want to close this conversation?
Yeah, well, what's been great about it is it's been a natural conversation, meaning that each topic followed from the previous one, which is why these are fun, like kind of long form discussions. People like watching these because you just like to see where do two clear thinking people go in a conversation. But then you're right. If you think about the end and where you began and you forget the middle part, you're like, well, how do we get here from there? And so I think it's always good. I just wrap up with going back to, we start off with the fact that people currently are debating, why does marriage have to be lasting? And so that brings up the question, it's really like asking, why does love have to be lasting? And there is this deep longing for love, so that when I've talked with people who say love doesn't have to be lasting, marriage is just about if I'm having fun, they'll admit that they're very jaded. They'll say, I came to that view because I don't think love is real. I think everybody's messed up and no one can do that. And so I'm not looking for something that isn't realistic. And so we have to then help them and say, I understand that's true in one sense. You know, you're jaded for reasons that did happen to you. I don't blame you at all. But there might be more to it. That very fact of people have let me down should push you to look for the love that won't let you down. And that's only going to be found in divine love, not human love. And so the solution isn't to go jaded and say, fine, I'll just do, 1 year relationship at a time. The solution is to go the other direction and say, this pushes me to say, I want to know the love of God, which is what will never let me down. So that's kind of how I end up from very important practical questions to that foundational, ground floor level stuff.
I think this is a great conclusion. It makes me, the sentence that is often used is that we were made for more. Like, yeah, our longings tell us what we were made for. And they're not just the product of the Disney movies we grew up with, because otherwise they would change. And instead, as you said, even polygamy, polyamory, like these things have happened again and again. But at some point, there are moments in places where cultures get closer to the ideal, and then we lose it again, and then we get closer again. So, I mean, probably the hope is that the generations, that come after us will do a better job and stop messing things up as ours did. I want to thank you very much for your time, for your knowledge, and I hope that I can invite you again, because it's always a great pleasure to talk to you.
It was a lot of fun. I love talking with you as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to all our listeners. We hope you liked this episode. And please let us know what you want us to discuss next. Thank you.